Greetings to everybody and a good evening, and let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this time and this opportunity to gather together in holy conversation. You've given us a responsibility as stewards to care for creation. Please open our eyes and our ears and our hearts to the beauty and sanctity of all its parts. Open us to wisdom of people from many cultures and times who have learned to care for the earth with love. Open us to the facts about the current state of this, our island home, both the gravity of those facts and the seeds for hope, wherever they may be found. Open us to the ideas and desires of one another to make a difference, to contain damage and to turn the tide toward restoration. And open us in love to all parts of your gift to us, animal and plant, earth, sea, and sky. Open us to one another and always to you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Edie. Kathy, I'm going to turn over to you for an introduction.
Okay, so welcome everybody. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Lisa Graumlich. She is the Dean Emeritus of the College of the Environment at the University of Washington. She has devoted her career to studying the causes and impacts of climate change, with a special focus on using paleoecological records such as tree rings to understand the magnitude of human impacts. Lisa is passionate about science communication and speaks frequently on climate change impacts and adaptation. She has testified on long-term climate variability before the U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. She is the president-elect of the American Geophysical Union as of January 1st, 2021. Lisa was also recently selected to be a member of the presiding bishop's delegation to the United Nations 26th Conference of Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, otherwise known as COP26, you'll be hearing about that later, taking place in early November. Lisa is an active member of St. Mark's Cathedral, and we are so lucky she shares her scientific expertise with our Creation Care ministry. Lisa.
Thank you, Kathy, and thank you all of you for being here. I particularly want to make first of all, a deep thanks to the team. This is not just me. There's a team that put this on today, and it includes Marjorie and Kathy, who you've already met, as well as Emily Meeks, who isn't with us, but was absolutely critical in putting this together, Heather Sutkus, and Richard Hartung. And I also want to make a particularly warm welcome to some of you outside the St. Mark's community. I was going to give John Kidd the award for having traveled the farthest by Zoom to get here, but I think we have a guest from Iowa. Rob Hogg is here. He's a state senator from Iowa, and he as well is a member of the presiding bishop's delegation. So Rob, a particularly warm welcome. So give me a second. I'm going to share my screen, and we should be good at this by now. I'm going to make all of you disappear. There you go. Now it's just us and the slides. So what happened last month is that the 6th assessment report of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC report, was published. And it was published with some pretty sober words around it. It was called the Code Red for Humanity. That's not usually how scientists talk. And it was some sobering news in the midst of a summer that, beyond the Delta variant, was full of very troubling news with respect to climate. Recall in July, we had the massive flooding in Germany and also in China, although that got less less press than the German floods. We ourselves here in the Northwest were under the extreme heat, the heat dome. We then had as the summer continued, Hurricane Ida devastated the southern part of Louisiana for weeks, people without power. And all of us started to be touched by climate change. So we have started to realize that climate change is touching all of our lives. And the question, as a community of faith, arises, what do we do as both stewards of creation and as a community dedicated to social justice? So I want to make sure that you understand the urgency of the message from the scientific community, and that you use that to strengthen your resolve to act on that urgency. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to, learn how to make my slides go. We're going to, you're going to have me for like 20 minutes talking science. Yep. And so what is the most recent climate change? Why take it seriously? Second, what can we do about it? That's going to be a moderated panel with 3 other people besides myself. Third, what will you do? That'll be a chance for us in small groups to talk about what it is we're doing and what it is that we seek to do in the future, and then a closing. And recently, we've started the tradition of, how those Zoom conversations sometimes seem really abrupt, like we just all turn off our computers and walk into the kitchen. So we started having after parties. You don't have to come to the after party, but if you still want to chat for another 15 minutes after the formal ending, I'll be around, the other organizers will be around, and we can have more conversation. So here we go. Okay, we're going to start with some input from you. We're going to take about 5 minutes, and I'd love to see in the chat what concerns you the most about climate change. This is something that I've been studying for 40 years. And yet I sometimes don't feel like I know what it is that's foremost on people's minds. So who's going to be brave and start putting things in the chat? Oh, Owen, loss of snowpack. Fires, ocean forests. Our lack of preparation. Are we resilient? Fires, flooding, sea level rise, people, cities, drought, people not understand. Oh my goodness. This is, biological and ecological disruption. That disruption word, I think, is really important. I'm going to go back to that. Loss of species. Thank you, Kathy. And that's something I know you know well. Impact of smoke on health. I'm making some notes. Sea level rise, loss of property. Thank you, Rob. That's coming from Iowa. We appreciate your empathy here.
The impact on agriculture.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. I see that from Richard. Mm-hmm. Loss of potable water. Deep water oxygen in the ocean. Thank you. Availability of drinking water. So resources.
Human extinction.
Yeah. I mean, that's okay. I'm going to give this one more minute. Oh, you know what, Carrie? Thank you. It's one of those what you call wicked problems, meaning not so much that it's evil, but it's something that is so multifaceted. Effects on future generations. We're going to talk more about that, Ruth. Thank you so much. Okay, I am going to. Refugees, yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop looking at the chat and talk. Oh, whoops. Hang on. I'm going to figure out how to use Google Slides is what I'm going to do. Here we go. Yep. Okay, here we go. Thank you. You guys saw a quick preview. So what is the IPCC report and why is everybody taking it so seriously? So I'm going to try I've been being coached by my team not to use acronyms. So you see this word IPCC? Let's pull it apart for a second. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the United Nations. Intergovernmental meaning it is something that is a policy tool for governments negotiating with each other as they come into treaty negotiations to address climate change. And the report is the cornerstone of climate science that is the basis for policymaking. In some resources that we should be sharing you with the end, you can see the whole report, and certainly you've been seeing summaries of that in the news. So what does it look like from the scientist's point of view? It's a lot of work, to be perfectly honest. There's literally, in that report, it is the work of over 200 scientists who review over 14,000 scientific papers. And they spend several years doing that review of the state of the science. Some of my favorite scientists are there on the left of your screen with that sort of intensity of how they're working. It is scholars in that particular picture from Nigeria, Australia, and England, sort of all working together to hone the scientific policy, the scientific take-home message that then go, the figure on the right, to a line-by-line review by government science experts. Every sentence in the policymakers' summary has been vetted by all 195 national governments. It is a process that is, in my lifetime, unprecedented in its scope and in its care. It is comprehensive, it's balanced, it's robust, it comes with a very transparent process. And so when there's a lot of science in the news, when you see the IPCC report, it is special and it gets attention because of the specialness of this process. So what are the key messages? And these are the three most important messages from my point of view. Number one, climate change is happening now, and we, the human species, are responsible for a 2-degree Fahrenheit increase in global temperature since the 1850s. Did you hear how I said that? Like, there's no question about it. If you had heard me give the same report for the previous IPCC report from 5 years ago, you would have heard a lot of hedging language, like we have high confidence that this has happened, or we have medium confidence that we have happened. We did not have the models and the data to make that unequivocal statement until the last several years. And when you hear the scientific community say, this is it is because of the vast amount of data and the rigor with which we have come to approach that problem. It's happening and we are responsible. We know that. Now, those same tools are able to allow us to make projections into the future. The Earth will be 2 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit hotter by the end of the century, depending critically on decisions that we will be making in the next decade. And then finally, we are locked into 30 years of worsening climate impacts no matter what, because of the residence time of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so there's a way in which we need to be prepared for warming, even if we could turn off fossil fuels tomorrow. Now, based on what you said in the chat, I don't know that I need to even have this slide because you're very well aware of the kinds of impacts that we are seeing. But what I want you to do is reflect for a moment, once again, thinking about why are we in a different place right now? When we used to talk about climate change, we used to talk about these long, slow impacts, the sea level rise and how it would affect Bangladesh and their wonderful delta-based agricultural ecosystems and what would happen to all that arable land. Or, oh, I remember 5 or so years ago, there was a Vogue magazine cover with Leonardo DiCaprio on a piece of sea ice with a baby polar bear. And there was the notion that by the end of the century, the sea ice would be gone and polar bears, I'm actually really serious about this, polar bears would be facing extinction. It seemed so far away. It was the Arctic. It was polar bears. It was decades away. And even Leonardo DiCaprio didn't seem to spur us to action. Fast forward to now, the climate extremes that we have been seeing are immediate. I would hazard a bet that none of us, all of us, let's say, on this call, have been touched by climate change or have friends and family that have been. So it is here now, and it has been particularly the extreme weather events driven by climate change that have created these impacts. So what are we going to do? First of all, there's 3 take-home messages. One is there is a window of time in which we need to act. The action that we need to take is cutting emissions. And we are so good. We're such good Episcopalians, following the carbon tractor and driving hybrid and electric vehicles, et cetera. But I'm going to argue that there's a lot that we need to do collectively that really pushes a much stronger commitment collectively as a nation and as a global community to move towards cutting emissions and, as we say, decarbonizing the global economy. So what does that look like? Future temperatures absolutely depend on the choices we are making today. So I think you might be able to see my little pointer. We are right here at the end of that white line. In the next decade, we have the opportunity to make substantial cuts in fossil fuel emissions, oil, gas, natural gas. Or if we don't make those cuts, we will see by the end of the century a 9-degree Fahrenheit increase in global temperatures, absolutely a disruption of all that we know and love in the Earth's creation. But you'll notice that if we can make those substantial cuts, we often hear about trying to cap the warming at about 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. And there's reasons to believe, while that will be challenging, that is a level of warming, take a big breath here, that we might have the ability to adapt to. So that is what we are working towards. Now, how are we going to do it? That was sort of a big challenge. We're going to flatten that curve on global emissions. And one of the things that you often hear people say is they'll pull you aside, back when we used to have cocktail parties or go to coffee houses together or something, and they'll say, I have a solution for the climate change problem. And if somebody has just one solution, it isn't a solution. What we need to do is to bring, I always say that there's no silver bullet that's more like silver buckshot. We need a number of different actions taken as soon as possible that will allow us to address this issue. And my favorite collection of those come from Project Drawdown. And this is where I cue Marjorie. Marjorie, put that website into the chat, please, if you weren't already aware of it. And the great thing, particularly for me as a scientist, is the team at Project Drawdown is looking to find where is it that we've got technologies that are here or are almost ready to be deployed at scale that will help us reduce carbon emissions right now. And with a return on investment and a technological feasibility that allows us to actually flatten that curve. And so when you see, I promise this is the wonkiest of my slides. This is from the Drawdown people. They've got 3 main buckets of climate solutions. And there's multiple. There's 100 climate solutions in their website and in their companion book. One of those buckets is to reduce the sources of carbon emitted into the atmosphere, changing the way in which we produce electricity, changing the way in which we produce food, industry, transport, urban infrastructure, all of these ways in which we are structuring society to emit fossil fuels. Now, in addition, number two, there's supporting sinks. It's sort of an unfortunate, that's like one of these science words for carbon that goes out of the atmosphere and into the biosphere, otherwise known as forests and soils or ocean productivity. And shifting agricultural practice, restoring ecosystems, particularly forests, is really key to supporting those sinks. And finally, improving society. We know that when we actually pay attention to education and health for people, they make more environmentally sound decisions. And so that is a piece of the solution as well. So the solutions are there. And they go beyond things that we can do as individuals and as families. So what is one of the collective ways in which we are doing this? I mentioned that the IPCC report was going to be the cornerstone on which the Conference of the Parties to the UN Convention on Climate Change will be the cornerstone on which they will act. These are the annual international negotiations on the way in which governments of the world hold each other accountable for reducing climate emissions. COP26 is coming up in early November. Senator Hogg, myself, and Rachel Tabor Hamilton, Reverend Rachel Tabor Hamilton from Everett will be delegates to this convention, which we will attend virtually. And the agenda is informally being called coal, cash, cars, and trees. And that's what it is. So coal, we want the developed world to kick the coal habit by 2030 and the developing world to do it by 2040. That's the ambitious agenda. Cars, we want the world to abandon fossil fuel internal combustion engines. Cash, we want the richest nations that have historically produced so much of the world's carbon to recommit to supporting the rest of the planet to go green with funds of $100 billion a year. And trees, we want COP26 to commit to restoring nature and habitat, ending deforestation, because trees are our best natural defense against climate change. Now, the Episcopal Church has played a role in the UN negotiations, starting with the COP21, 2015 in Paris, which was largely considered a very successful conference of the parties. It's the one in which all the nations of the world, except two, and the US was one of them, agreed to a 1.5, to trying to cap warming at 1.5 and taking the steps necessary. So that is the delegation to COP21 in Paris. COP26, there's a set of virtual events. And once again, this will be on the Creation Care website, but you'll see that there's a kickoff right before COP starts that you can attend. There is a liturgy for planetary crisis during COP26, and there'll be a closing event as well. So before I quit talking, the last thing I want to leave with you in this formal presentation is we need to decarbonize the world economy by 2050. We need to stop having fossil fuels as the way in which we run society. And it's not going to be simple. It's not just going to be a carbon tax or some kind of clean electricity mandate. It needs to be a restructuring of our electrical grids. Wires need to be strong. Solar farms have to be erected. Industries have to be remade. And this is the kind of change that has to be orchestrated by government. And hence the importance of the infrastructure bills currently in Congress, and hence the importance of something like COP26. So consumers and companies will ultimately do most of the work, but it's going to be because we've got this national and global commitment to work together to decarbonize the world economy. So we need individual action and we need leadership. We need everybody. Okay. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slide, but this is my reminder that this is the moment in which we move to a panel discussion moderated by Kathy, and it will be myself, Marjorie Rignas, and Heather Sutkus.
Okay. Whew. Everyone take a deep breath. Thank you, Lisa. That was so eloquently presented in a very understandable way, but I know you specialize in that. Okay, so I need to switch back and forth screens. So the four of us, I don't see, let's see, are we going to just have the four of us in the window? Which would be helpful for me. Well, there's four of us on top. Okay. So thinking about what Lisa just presented, I'll start with asking Marjorie and Heather the first question, and then turn to Lisa for any responses she has. So what thoughts immediately come to mind, or another way to think about it is, what are your first impressions as you consider all the information Lisa just presented to us? What jumped out at you?
Go ahead, Heather. You got something?
No, go ahead.
Well, I guess the first thing that jumps out at me is that there are solutions. But of course, we've known that. I personally have been aware of that for the last year or two. Others have known that for a long time. But it's scary because somebody mentioned in the chat at the beginning, it's going to take a huge amount of coordination, political will, and determination by all of us. And so that's kind of the first thing I think about.
Yeah, well stated. So Heather.
Yeah, the
Heather,
first
go
thing
ahead.
I thought of that stuck out really to me was like urgency over and over again. Urgency, urgency, urgency. And it made me think of this time when I was in second grade and we were talking about saving the planet and how if we all took shorter showers and turned off the water while we brushed our teeth, how we would be able to save the earth. And but then I remember going home and thinking, is that really going to do a lot? And thinking about like, you know, I know I was only in second grade. I can't believe I was thinking about this. But then thinking like, what happens if I don't? And then I asked my teacher and she told me about the polar bears. And she told me about how if I didn't start taking action, then we might lose the polar bears. And all I could think about was, oh no, I'm not going to be able to see them in the zoo anymore. And the poor polar bears. And I think what Lisa brought up that I thought was a really good point was that it's not just about the polar bears anymore. It's like we are actually experiencing these effects in our own lives. It's humans now. It's not the polar bears losing their homes. It's millions of climate refugees that are losing their homes. And I think that's, you know, I love that Lisa emphasized that point. So thank you for doing that.
Great, thanks. Lisa, responses to those thoughts?
Yeah, you know,
or what's top of mind for you after
well,
your presentation?
What's so interesting is, you know, in the introduction, it said I was Dean Emeritus. So I used to be an employee of the state. And there were only, as Dean at the University of Washington, there were things I could not say because they were too political, but now I'm not. So Heather, thank you. Because anybody that does the math knows that Heather brushing her teeth with half the amount of water is not going to scale to address this issue. And that what I feel like has happened is that the fossil fuel industry has told us that we as consumers are driving the planet by the choices that we are making, and not fully owning, first of all, the climate disinformation and misinformation that they have been spreading, but also the way in which they continue to seek to have a very special and subsidized relationship with our government and with the choices that are out for us. So it's, of course, individual choices are important. But Heather, I love that, as a third grader, you were still sort of astute enough to kind of go like, I'm not sure this is going to scale. And I think that is the critical point we're at, is that people are waking up. Climate change is happening now. We breathe wildfire smoke. All of these things that I, for years, have been talking about was going to happen in the 2020s and 2030s, and it's here now. And we've got to do something.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I just, and the moderator, but just for me, it's just struck me how particularly this summer, with all of the extreme weather events that have been happening, including in New York. I mean, the hurricane in Louisiana affected New York City, with flooded subways and apartments and all the streets and deaths. So, in New Jersey. And it's just amazing. I mean, it really is affecting everything. And then the extent of the fires, I always think about the animals. I'm a biologist, so I always think about the animals. But so those are just some of my thoughts. And before we leave this question, Marjorie, did you want to say anything more on this one before I move to the next?
No, we can continue on.
Okay.
You have me thinking, was I supposed to say something more?
No, nope.
Okay.
I'm just asking just to be sure, because sometimes people say things and they have a response. Okay, so there's few questions that are coming into the chat, so I'll turn to those in a minute, but I'm going to continue with the question I have here. So thank you for those questions. What gives you hope in the face of the climate challenges that we and our planet are collectively faced with now? Yeah, so what gives you hope?
Well, I have hope because we have people like Heather here who is aware of it, and she is going to be, I think she sees the urgency more than some of us who are into our 60s and older see this. But I have hope just in the fact that we're having the conversation now. I mean, I always was kind of ecologically minded and was a good recycler and did all those things, but it wasn't until the wildfire smoke hit a few years ago that I realized this needs to be talked about more, and we need to actually take some actions instead of just hoping somebody else is going to do it. And we've done some of that at St. Mark's, and I think it was Andrew Himes who first kind of turned me on to the idea that we cannot think about this as individual actions, but as a collective action. And so that's what we're trying to do at St. Mark's, and hopefully that will be replicated in other places where we have a commitment to get down to a net zero carbon footprint by 2030 for the facilities at St. Mark's, but also for the 450 or so families that we have registered at St. Mark's. And so working together, using less water to brush our teeth, we feel when we see that collective action and the other actions we're taking, you do feel a little bit more like, okay, you're making a difference. I see that Steve and Kathy asked in the chat about tracking our carbon footprint, whether or not it makes a difference. I always think what really makes a difference is just whatever you do that makes you more aware of your carbon footprint. If it's tracking it online on a carbon tracker, that's great. Having conversations and all of that, but it's about awareness. It's about changing what we demand of our leaders and politicians. And I'm not saying you have to vote for any certain party, but whatever party you are, you need to ask the people that you're voting for that climate needs to be at the top of the agenda, along with all the other world problems. So anyway, I'm sorry, I'll let Heather respond.
No apologies. No, that's really good. Heather.
Thank you, Marjorie. I also wanted to address Dean Steve's question about does it work? And I think right now, even when I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, so 100 people. And I'm going to be very honest. Is that really making a large impact? Probably not. Right now, no. But what it is doing is it's starting something that I think that imagine if, this was a start, the carbon tracker, the idea of having a carbon tracker. Imagine if St. Mark's was one of the very first communities that had a lot of their congregation tracking their carbon footprint. And then maybe this spreads. And then imagine someday when my generation, it's just a thing. It's just a thing that everyone does. And I know it's not that way for many of the generations right now, but what if we grew up with it and it was just a way of life where we look at what we're doing, we look at the choices we're making. So yeah, maybe now 100 people, it seems a little insignificant. But that's not the point. I think the point is more that it's starting something that will hopefully continue on much farther than just the few generations that are using it right now, hopefully into my generation. And that's part of the reason that I chose to join Creation Care, was so that I could be part of that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I love the thought about if your generation takes it on now, but and also that this can spread, because all of us have friends, right? So, this gets to sharing and trying to inspire your friends and community. And then back to what Marjorie said about politicians, making sure that they know that their constituents are watching. And if more and more people do that, it builds. It's tricky because we have to be patient, but at the same time, we don't have a lot of time. So there is that sense of urgency. Lisa.
So I just want to say, I love Carbon Tracker because people are keeping track of carbon dioxide. And do you know that, can you imagine 10 or 15 years ago that you could get people to obsessively track something that is 400 parts per million in the atmosphere? It's not even the biggest part. It's not even the biggest constituent of the atmosphere. 400 parts per million.
And you can't see it.
You can't see it. It's like whatever. So going to what Marjorie said, the consciousness we have of how our everyday life is changing, fundamentally changing the atmosphere, I think is part of what happens with Carbon Tracker. The other thing that happens is those individual consumer choices do start to add up. So transportation, and Richard, I think, is always good at these numbers. It's like 30% of at least the US carbon budget. So the things we drive, the buses, et cetera. And here I will reveal, I'm the daughter of an automotive engineer that grew up outside of Detroit. So I'm kind of obsessed with cars. Not always a great thing for a climate scientist. But did you see in the news that Ford Motor Company, one of the Detroit big three, is investing almost $12 billion with a B dollars in 3 battery factories and 1 truck plant, and to make them all electric. it's going to be it have the capacity to make 1 million electric vehicles per year at the end of the decade. It's Ford. The factories are in Kentucky and Tennessee, the coal states. That gives me,
too.
so we have got industry is responding to consumer demand. And I just have to say, the notion that a Ford F-150 is going to be electric just makes my heart sing. Okay. I'm a car person.
Well, the cynic in me says that's because they see the economics of it. That's where they're going to get.
Yeah, but
it doesn't matter. Right?
Whatever, that works, that's fine.
As long as the result, it's really about the results, right? The outcomes. But I think, and isn't General Electric also, I think General Electric also is committing to electric cars only, but I don't have the stats in front of me.
There's other international things. Just Dennis Hayes, guy who met at Earth Day way back when, sent me an email earlier today that I got notes here so I don't screw this up. Singapore is investing $23 billion in a photovoltaic array in Australia to make it so that it will be completely clean energy within the next decade. So, wow. Yeah. And once again, when Singapore gets photovoltaics at that scale, it makes it cheaper for all of us. It really pushes the technology forward. So these are big silver buckshots. This is starting to scale, and that's what gives me hope.
Yeah, that's very encouraging.
Kathy, I'm going to suggest, unless we have other questions in the chat or something, that we could go to breakout rooms a little bit earlier so that people can talk amongst themselves about these changes, because generally in something like this, when we do breakout rooms, there's never enough time. So I don't, Heather or Kathy or Lisa, if you want to say something else, that's great. But
no, I sense a hunger in the chat for some real chat. And there's some wonderful, there's some great comments here, including, thinking about not only what we do as individual consumers, but also as people of faith. And what is the intersection with faith and values?
Yeah. So
Kathy, you, I think you lead us in instructions for our next steps.
Yeah, don't you have isn't there a slide? You have a slide.
There's a slide for this. Yeah. Okay, that involves me finding the share screen. Da-da-da-da. Okay.
Start us. Okay. So what we're going to do is take a moment. Everyone, please take a moment. We're going to have a moment of reflection on your own and write down your thoughts about one of these three things. And again, this has to do with it's about actions. And there's, so you can choose learning more. And what does that mean to you? You can choose make a change in your personal life. And what does that mean? Or you could choose connect with others for collective action. And what does that mean? So take a moment. And at the end of that moment, I'll signal it. And then I think someone's going to put us into breakout rooms. And then, great. Thank you, Richard. He put it in the chat, those in the chat as well. So that you can refer to those during the sessions. So start.
And we're going to come back out of this chat around 8 o'clock, and we can kind of just do a brief little review then. So we've asked Richard to put us into breakout rooms of 3 or 4 people. Kathy, you're muted.
Let's take a moment. I'm going to time us. Take a moment to write those thoughts down, and then I'll ask Richard to put us into breakout rooms.
Okay.
And I believe we have everyone back.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. And I think we would just like to maybe take 5 or 10 minutes here to hear from folks about what you discussed in your breakout rooms, what came out. And I think we can just unmute when you have something to say. If there's too much, then we'll put it into chat.
Well, I jumped into the number 3, the collective action, because this is where I feel most stuck. And I got some good suggestions, but I still feel, I have a very tight neighborhood with an annual neighborhood gathering, which has about 50, 60 people, and we have a tight list of people to call on, and so there's a lot of camaraderie and common interest in our neighborhood. But my goal is to take, one of the things we learned in the drawdown thing was that it's collective action at the small scale is one of the most effective ways to do it. And I haven't figured out how to step up to that leadership role yet. And I feel resistance in myself for taking that role. So we talked about that.
That's great. We talked, one thing that came up in our group was, again, on the collective action and the interconnectedness of all the work that's happening. Just, the point about talking to politicians and then working together, just the other churches. So St. Mark's is working with other churches through Earth Ministry and Faith Action Network on creation care and carbon tracker, for instance.
Kathy, if I can build on what you just said about connectedness, in sort of the political realm, there were a couple comments that were good reminders, and that is, even though in some ways many of us sort of depend upon our elected representatives to do what we think is right, what we would want them to do, that it doesn't hurt to remind them that we really expect them to be activists in these areas. And another comment that came up was that voting rights is really a climate issue. So the importance of ensuring that everybody gets a right to vote were a couple of the things that came up.
Great, thank you. Others?
I think there were a number of us in our group who were concerned about or wondering how to go about the collective action type things. One of the things I found is that I keep bumping into people. I mean, I ran into Richard Harding the other day at another thing, and somebody mentioned a guy named Andrew Hines, who it turns out I'm already working with. So, the community is out there, and you might be surprised who's actually already a part of it.
Thanks. Okay, other groups.
So in our group, we talked a little bit about how to kind of make changes and drive interest amongst larger groups. We talked a little bit about, maybe some friendly competition amongst groups to reduce carbon, maybe green type efforts, that sort of thing that can sometimes work. And then the woman who was in our group, I don't see her anymore, and I forget her name now. She might have dropped off.
Juanita,
okay. She told a really great story about her and her friend. She dug up her yard and got rid of all the grass to save water, and then she built a garden. And she basically, by doing that example, she got everybody else in the neighborhood interested in that, and now they're talking about doing solar cells together. And so it just struck me that, wow, what a great thing. It's kind of like making lemonade out of lemons. You're trying to solve this big problem, but yet you're actually meeting people you may never have met, or you're putting your shoulder to the wheel with other people that you may never have worked with before. So there's a positive part of it too.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's building community, and then it's also, in the more people that are doing this, the more difference it makes, even if it's still a neighborhood. But yeah, that's great.
And I was thinking about the opportunity that the St. Mark's community we have here with the St. Mark's community. For example, our van was totaled recently, and now we're looking for another car, and we're thinking of getting another car. And it would be really great to hear from other St. Mark's community people, like, well, have you vetted the different electric cars, and what would your recommendations be, so that it will actually become community building, and it can become a collective action.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, we had talked about having teams of people to help each other, and we were focused more on just getting more people to join the carbon tracker, but it seems like it might be good to see if we can look into having teams, like either by neighborhood or interest or something. Yes.
Help everybody else rise up and get in, because sometimes it's hard to know what to do and how to do it well. And if others in the group have figured out, a way to do something, other people can pick it up. I mean, that's a way to share.
Yeah, excellent point.
Okay, then I welcome people's suggestions on what the ask looks like to get my neighbors to get together.
I'll follow up.
Okay, I thought maybe you would help me. You live pretty close to me anyway, so.
Right.
But I got all these young mothers who are just, so eager to have good lives for their children.
Oh, that's great. Okay, yeah. We can have more conversations.
Good, that's good.
Sometimes if just people see things, like one of the things that happened in my neighborhood was there were 2 electric cars, and now there's like 7 or 8, and I just keep seeing new ones every day. And there's this thing where you don't necessarily have to say things to people. You don't have to argue with them or anything. You just make it look like this is normal, or the thing that's happening, and then people will start catching on to it even without having to go out and knock on their door or anything.
That's true. Yeah.
For us introverts, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they say about solar panels, that when one house in the neighborhood puts on solar panels, then many others will follow.
I like the fact that St. Mark's, from the pulpit and in our liturgies, has started to normalize an awareness of the environment and speak for it. I'm trying to think of how specifically, as members of a church, and a church which is a kernel of a much larger church, what our special role is. I had always thought of this group as focusing more on what we individually can do, like brushing our teeth with less water. But I'm glad it's a lot bigger than that. But I think it needs to be bigger still. But is that something that should be happening within the context of the church, or are there unique things that the church can be doing, meaning us?
Well, certainly the creation care, the liturgy, this summer, the prayers, and a lot of the liturgy mentioned the importance of valuing the earth and the planet and all the resources. And I love that. So I think it's a seasonal thing, but yeah, it's a good reminder to the larger community, the larger congregation. So I think it's 8:10. So
Kathy, I think what the idea was, I would make a few more comments and then turn to either Edie or Marta to make a final closing. Is that
yes. Yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
so? I'm going to share my screen one more time because I'm getting so good at it. Here we go. So one of the things, come on, here we go. One of the things you'll see on the Creation Care website is a set of links to all of our team's favorite resources right now. And so that is sort of on its way, sort of to you. And so this is a way you can sort of move forward. But importantly, the thing that I want to reflect back to you is the longing that I heard here to not settle with doing too little. I love this Thomas Merton quote: the biggest human temptation is to settle for too little. And this lovely wood print that says another world is possible. And what we have the ability to do as people of faith is have conversations that are technically grounded. We can know a whole lot about the IPCC report, or we can know about, photovoltaics and electric cars or whatever. But we also have the ability to start conversations with people about our values and about the justice issues associated with creation care and climate change. And so I challenge you to start having, even the introverts, start having more of those conversations that really are about connecting with people about this shared value, and together imagining a world that we will be proud to leave to our grandchildren. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to someone.
I'll take it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing all this information. And I really appreciate everyone attending. I think we have over 30 people here, which is wonderful. A lot of rich conversation. And I think if you don't mind, we'll probably follow up with an email to all of you to see what else you might want to do, or how you might want to be more involved, or what ideas you have, those kinds of things. So,
Marjorie, there was a question in the chat: will the slides be posted?
Yeah, we will post some form of this Zoom call on our Creation Care page, which is on the St. Mark's website. And I'll put some kind of an announcement to that effect in the weekly newsletter, so that we'll see that. And I can also follow up with an email to everybody here to let them know when that's available. So I'm going to ask Marta if she would lead us. Marta, also known as Trapper Doug tonight, if she could lead us in a closing prayer. And then if anybody would like to stick around and chat some more, that's fine as well. We'll make sure that we're done here by 8:30 for sure. But let's have a closing prayer now, Marta.
A note, I wasn't trying to be incognito. My own computer wouldn't work tonight, so I told my husband I had to have his. So he graciously gave it up. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Lord, we know that we gather to talk about the earth, to talk about our responsibility for your creation. Lord, you have acknowledged that there are things we have yet to learn, and the importance of our willingness to work with one another You have interconnected us with creation, but you also interconnect us with one another. And it is together in community that we are able to do the work that needs to be done. We ask that you inspire us, that you encourage us, that you enable us to take the risks that we need to take boldly for your glory and for your creation. Let us do the work you want us to do when you gave us the care of the earth. Amen.
Well, thanks so much, Marta. And thank you to all who've come. Richard, I think you can stop recording now.